Hi everyone, welcome to Top 10 Middle Game Ideas number 7, the exchange sacrifice. There are two main types of exchange sacrifices. You can give up the exchange for tactical reasons. Say it's part of an attack and you want to break through to the king, you give up the exchange in order to make that effective. Or you can give up the exchange for positional reasons where you have some kind of long-term compensation. So in this series I'm going to cover both parts, but I'm going to start with the tactical exchange sacrifice. And I have an example on the screen here. Let's back up a couple of steps. This is a game between Ian Napomniachi and Viswanathan Anand. And Napomniachi has the white pieces, Anand has the black pieces. And Anand starts with Queen d7 here. This was an English opening, and Anand had played this kind of risky line where the e-pawn gets pushed all the way to e5. You can see there's been some trades. The c-pawns got traded off, the b-pawn came forward, and the e-pawn got traded off. Anyway, interesting tactical line. In this position, the knight is under fire. The queen and the bishop are piled up on the knight, and Napomniachi defends with the move e4. And I suppose it's possible to take here and take back. And maybe Vichy was trying to set up something like that, but he played the move rook f to e8 here, and that seems to be a mistake. So in this position, Napomniachi spotted a tactic. I wanted to say this was played at the Kolkata Rapid and Blitz in India, in Kolkata, India, the city formerly known as Calcutta, Kolkata, India, in 2019. I'll have pointers to these games in the description of the video if you want to check out the full game. So anyway, the knight is defended. Black has just put the rook in the center here, and after the exchange there'll be a loose bishop here. So, but Napomniachi spotted a tactic in this position, so he doesn't worry about that. He just plays the move knight to h6 check. Now this is not an exchange sacrifice, and it's not really a sacrifice at all, because if Black takes the knight, then the rook will take the bishop, and that is just an even exchange. So it's not a sacrifice at all, and in fact it's good for white because this is a weak pawn, the king is exposed. So that's basically giving your opponent a free attack. So Vichy, of course, didn't play that. He stepped the king to the side, and now you can guess the next move because of the title. But here comes the exchange sacrifice. The exchange sacrifice occurs when you give up a rook for one of the binder pieces, either a bishop or a knight, because the rook is more valuable than those pieces. And yeah, Black doesn't want to play on a piece down, so he takes the rook, and giving him the best chance of surviving. But what has White accomplished with this exchange sacrifice? I mean, he's lost a rook, so he needs to have something in exchange for it. Now, you could have just calculated this all the way out, but just speaking in general about exchange sacrifices, when are they justified? One thing that's happened is that the bishop that was here was defending some squares on the king side, and now those squares are no longer being defended. So you've eliminated one of the defenders around the king. And the second thing that's happened is that you've messed up the pawn structure around the king by pulling the g-pawn over to the f-file. So you've opened up some lines of attack against the king. And also this pawn itself on f6 is a weak pawn now. It's doubled. So that's what you get in compensation for the exchange. And in this particular position, there's actually an immediate tactical follow-up. So you might want to think about this position for a while and see if you can find the best follow-up for white in this position, or what other ideas there might be in this position at least. Okay, I'm going to give the answer away now. Napomniachi played the move queen to f3. And now notice that queen takes f6 here is mate. The king has no escape squares because the knight, he is guarding the square that the king might run to, and the queen will be attacking along the diagonal, so there's no room for the king to go anywhere there. And this is maybe another feature of exchange sacrifices, particularly of the attacking kind. You give up the rook, but you often have a minor piece that can that is nearby or can jump into the space, and the minor piece near the opponent's king in conjunction with the queen or other heavy pieces can often be more powerful than the queen and rook combo. So these minor pieces are often very good close-in fighters. Okay, so what's to be done about defending this pawn? It can be defended in a number of ways, but then no matter how you defend it, the second threat comes into play. And the second threat is on this diagonal with the queen and the bishop and the queen on a battery here. There's a threat of pawn takes pawn, there, and that forks those two pieces. So white is winning material here one way or another. Vichy played king g7, so Napomniachi went ahead and played e takes d5. Vichy took back, attacking the queen, maybe hoping to trade off. Well, if the queen takes, perhaps the queen can take back and then the king can grab the knight. But the knight just moves with check here, and Vichy resigned. But the consequence here is the king, well, if the king goes almost anywhere, it gets mated. So first of all, notice that king here leads to this bishop check and this mate. So the king really doesn't have many squares to go to. If the king went directly to g8, then you could, now if the king stayed on g8, you could check with the queen and then come in with, if the king went back to g8, you could check with the queen first and then come in with the bishop if it went that way, or come in with the queen if it went the other way. So it's a mate in almost every direction. Queen takes knight is possible, but that's pretty hopeless. So king h8 is the only thing that can be played here, and then just simply queen takes bishop, and white is up a piece. So here, let's take a look at the next example. This next game was actually played in the same city, but about 170 years earlier. So this was played in Calcutta in 1853 between John Cochran and Mahesh Chandra Banerjee, part of a series of games between the two players. I like to go back and look at some of these older games, particularly the Romantic era games, and there are certain players that have a lot of creativity in their play, and John Cochran is one of them. So I recommend looking at his games if you're looking for ideas, tactical ideas. Also, of course, Morphy, another famous Romantic player, and Anderson, the great German player. But Cochran maybe is not as well known. It's a very interesting player. And Banerjee also is an interesting player. He's learned to play the Indian form of chess first, and that caused him to favor this early development of the knights. He played the King's Indian defense in this game, maybe the earliest King's Indian defense on record. And in fact, the name Indian defenses arose because of this series of games. So this is how they got their name. In this game, Cochran played 4 pawns to the center against the King's Indian, and things have kind of fallen apart a bit in the center, but Cochran's pieces are nicely lined up for the attack, and he continues here with the exchange, taking a pawn, just trying to destroy the remaining pawn cover around Black's king. Black could take back, but Banerjee decided to take this pawn. Maybe he doesn't really want to give up that pawn so easily. And he gains a tempo on the bishops. The bishop steps out of the way and now attacks the rook. I think it's possible to take the bishop here. This pawn push is not a problem because the knight can take back. Yeah, I guess that's okay. The knight defends the rook there. But in any case, he didn't decide to take the bishop. He decided to keep the material on and just moved his rook to put some pressure on the bishop. So Cochran takes the pawn here, and now queen takes b4, grabbing another pawn, but more importantly, really threatening to take off that bishop. It's got 3 pieces attacking it and only 2 pieces defending it, so it's really hanging now. And now, if you had to guess the next move, you could refer to the title of the video and guess it. Yeah, the move is rook takes knight, the exchange sacrifice on f6 again. And giving up the rook for the knight There's actually two rooks hanging here. The queen could take this rook, or the king could take this rook. In the game, Banerjee played queen takes rook. But let's look at what happened with king takes rook first. In either case, what you've done with this exchange sacrifice is you've gotten rid of this knight, which was a good defender of the king. And at the same time, you've preserved this bishop, so it can continue to participate in the attack. So having an active minor piece is often a key idea in these exchange sacrifices. So now, in this line, this was not how it was played, but I just want to show how white could win from here. There's the queen check on the f-file, and black gets into big trouble if he runs this way. So let's look at running to this side, say king to e6. Queen comes in at f7 check, and king runs to d6, queen f6 check, and now you see the idea here. Well, one idea. If the king goes to the c-file, then this rook can move with check, so it won't be hanging anymore, and then the queen was free to take this rook. And black can try and avoid that by going here, but after the bishop check, it's all over. The king has to go either to the c-file somewhere, or if it goes back to the back rank, then the queen takes the rook with check anyway, and we'll have time to move this rook somewhere safe after that. So that is all over. Let's see, there are a few other tries here. Say after the first check, the king went to e7, and you've got queen coming in here to f7. If the king goes to d8, then let's see, yeah, you can come back here to f6 check, and once again he doesn't want to go to the c-file, so he's going to come back to d7, and you've got the bishop check. That'll be the same as the previous line. Or let's see, here he could go to d6 immediately, go queen f6 check, and then this is also a position which we've already seen, he either has to go to the c-file here, or he has to go to this d7 square where the bishop can check and force him to a bad square. So in all those cases, white fairly straightforwardly picks up the extra piece. So let's go back to the game. Here we are, rook takes f6 was just played. We can back up one more step. And the Mahesh replies with queen takes rook. So now the rook goes to f7 check, and the king steps aside, trying to avoid getting mated by stepping to the side here. But Cochran just pushes this pawn forward. He's actually trying to get rid of this pawn because it's kind of in the way of his pieces. Now with the pawn out of the way, the bishop is covering all of these squares. Of course, he'll queen the pawn if he gets a chance. So the rook has to block, and now rook check. And this is what I said. This is what I meant when I said he's trying to get rid of that pawn. If the king goes this way, it gets mated, so king takes pawn is pretty much forced. Rook to g6. And now the king runs to h7. That's probably the way it survives the longest. If it goes to f7, the queen once again can check on the f-file. And then, well, he doesn't, black probably does not want to lose this rook with check. That would give white time to defend. I mean, there is a danger here that black could get some kind of perpetual check against the king over here. That's probably what Banerjee was going for. But if you can grab this rook with check and give yourself a move or two to defend, that's good enough. So king here, the queen comes in with check, king d7, and then the queen steps forward with check. And now, well, in addition to taking this pawn with check, taking the rook with check on the next move, it's also mate. So the king is just getting mated in the open field if he goes in that direction. And so after this check, Banerjee played king to h7, but now this rook can move with a discovered check. So rook drops back, check, the king comes forward to h6. Now the rook checks from the h-file, king goes to the g-file, and the rook checks from h5. This is a nice move. So if you want to pause the video here and think about this, why why is this move working? The rook is obviously hanging. Yeah, these guys were pretty clever back in the day. Yeah, pause the video if you want time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away now. Of course, king takes rook is forced, and then there's queen f3 check. And if the king goes this way, there's going to be, well, the king runs this way. Yeah, he has no choice. He has to run that way. I'm sorry. I was getting ahead of myself. Then the queen runs to f6 with check. The bishop is guarding that square, so the king is forced to move back and forth along these squares. So the king goes back to h5, and then there's the mate. That's a nice one. The queen is guarding these squares, and of course it's protected by the pawns, so the pawns are helping, but the bishop is guarding the escape square there. So nice coordination between the queen and the bishop when they're on different colors, right? The bishop's covering the light squares and the queen is covering the dark squares. So that's how that game ended. Let's take a look at another example. The next game I wanted to show you was played in 1991 in the German Bundesliga between Alexei Shirov with the white pieces and John Nunn with the black pieces. Alexei Shirov is another one of these tactical players whose games are well worth studying. He wrote a book, which is a collection of his own games called Board on Fire. You might want to check out if you're interested. So this game started out as a King's Indian defense, another King's Indian. John Nunn is following a strategy often seen in the King's Indian of just trying to counterattack on the King's side, but this position doesn't look like a typical King's Indian position to me, other than it's really messy and complicated. That's kind of typical of Shirov's play. He likes to kind of mix things up and get unique positions on the board, and this position looks pretty unique to me. Anyway, in this position, Shirov continued with bishop to b4. Nunn kicked the bishop with a5, and he dropped back to a3. He wants to position his bishop on a different diagonal, so he's kind of happy to see that, I guess. He gets to a3 with tempo. But John Nunn plays bishop to c3 next, trying to maybe discoordinate White's pieces a little bit. So the rook comes up to e2, and now h4. So Nunn is just pushing ahead with his counterplay on the king side. And here's where Shirov comes up with a pretty smart idea. So if you want to guess the move here, you can. Go ahead and pause the video and think about it for a while. Okay, I'm going to give the answer away now. So even knowing the theme of this game, you might have this video, you might not have thought of this move, rook to e6, just putting the rook where it can be taken. This is another way of sacrificing the exchange, just letting your opponent take the rook. And this kind of sacrifice is often seen when you're doing a positional rook sacrifice. We should see some examples of that in future videos, with the idea of taking back with a pawn. And sometimes, say if it's protected by two pawns, it can be even better. You can get a strong protected passed pawn as a result of that sacrifice, and it can be good for White even if there is no immediate tactical follow-up. But this is a tactical sacrifice here. His idea is not to take with the pawn, but to take with the knight. So to show what would happen, so Nunn did not take the rook, at least not at first, so it's not an immediate sacrifice. But to show what would happen, White can take back with the knight here. And now this bishop has been eliminated that was defending the knight, and also this knight has gotten to a really excellent post with the tempo because it's hitting the queen. Now if black just gives the exchange back, says, okay, you gave me the exchange, I'll give it back to you, White has a good move in queen g4 check and just breaks through. So that's not a good reply at that point. So the queen has to move, probably lifting the queen to e7 so it can try and shield the king somewhat along the 7th rank is best. And then there's this exchange. Bishop takes f5. The rook has to take back. Again, we're taking advantage of the fact that we got rid of this bishop that was defending the knight on f5. That sacrifice on e6 was also interfering with the defense of the f5 square. But after the rook takes back, we have queen g4 check. winning a rook, and this is just winning for white. White is actually material up here and attacking. So bishop takes e6 is just something that can't be played in this position. The move that John Nunn played was knight to h6, which looks a little bit strange until you consider all the alternatives, which he must have thought through and rejected one by one. So to show what happens if you do, if you leave the knight there, say he pushed on with h3, just continuing with his counterplay, his attack over here. This maybe gives him a tempo move, like taking the pawn with check at some point. The idea is still you want to take advantage of this fact that this rook is interfering with the bishop's defensive f5. So you take on f5, the rook has to take back. Now you can throw in this check, rook g6. The king can't really step forward. Notice the knight is covering these two squares. So the king has to go to the side, goes to f8. And now queen to d3. It hits the loose bishop here, and it's also looking at this rook, which is only defended by the knight. And so now there's a big threat here. Actually, the knight can come back with check, and then that rook will fall. So queen e8 was played. It also gets the queen away from that fork. Let's see, I suppose if knight e6 was played, bishop takes would happen. But at the end of it, after you take the bishop, there would be two pieces hanging, this piece and this piece. So anyway, queen to e8 is best there. And then the rook comes back to e6. And yeah, and this is just deadly. Even so, because the rook is hitting the queen, and queen is also attacking two loose pieces. So bishop takes e6, only way to handle all that, but now knight takes bishop with check. And after the king moves, then the queen takes the rook. And once again, white is actually a piece up and still attacking. So John Nunn saw all of that. And in fact, John Nunn, I don't know if you realize this, but he invented that famous saying, loose pieces drop off. So his own saying is being used against him, because this one of the things this exchange sack is doing is it's creating loose pieces. It creates a loose piece here, and this piece was already loose. Okay, so rook e6 was played, and nothing works. So he has to get the knight away from that exchange, so he won't have a loose piece on f5 at least. But that fails because the bishop comes in with check. Now the king once again can't go to these squares anyway, because the knight covers them. So king steps up. I don't know if going to f8 was any better. Probably not. This is the line that was played. Now queen d3, hitting the loose piece here. And also, if there's an exchange of rooks, the queen can come in here with a mate threat. So bishop takes e6 now to prevent the rook from taking the rook. So finally, black had to accept the exchange sacrifice. And now there's two pieces hanging, but well, if you take the bishop with the knight, then the king... Oh, no, the king can't take there. I take it back, yeah. So either bishop could have been taken, but Shirov chose to take this bishop, which pins the rook. And then bishop back to g8 was played. It's getting rid of the, well, getting the bishop out of take. And maybe he's thinking of trying to exchange off some of these pieces, but it's not safe, because among the other threats here, there's also knight e6 check with a nasty fork. So the bishop has to stay on this diagonal, guarding against that fork, or the rook. Well, the rook is pinned at the moment. So anyway, Shirov played the move bishop b2, and Nunn resigned at this point. He could not find a move, and well, it looks pretty desperate. The bishop is kind of tied down to this. The bishop is tied down to this diagonal. And there's a threat of just taking the bishop and then taking here, and then coming in with check. Although he could take with the king or the queen. I guess that's probably a way to deal with it. And then there's, of course, the threats along the diagonal. So, for example, if the queen just drops back to c2, the bishop is still pinning the rook, and the queen is threatening to come into g6. That would also be fatal. So bishop to f7 is a try. And then after that, let's see, what did the chess engine recommend? I think the chess engine recommended the cold-blooded rook to e1, and it's just too much for white to handle. Maybe there's even a second exchange sacrifice in the offing. I mean, too much for black to handle. What's interesting, and this often happens in exchange sacrifices, is that after you've given up the exchange, you only have one rook, and your opponent has two. But the second rook is not really doing anything. You know, it's one of the tasks of the player who takes the exchange sacrifice and has the two rooks. You know, one of his jobs is to really activate his pieces and make sure that both rooks are working. But sometimes the rooks are somewhat redundant, and sometimes they're just out of play, as in this game. Anyway, let's back up after bishop to b2. In this position, Nunn resigned. So I have one more game I wanted to show you. For the last example, I wanted to show a complete game. It's fairly short, so I think we can get through this. This was played in 1860 between William Steinitz and Philip Mightner. So Steinitz has the white pieces, and Mightner has the black pieces. Steinitz is another player whose reputation is that of a stodgy positional player, but that was later on in his career when he was a world champion and when he was writing about chess. He started off in the 1860s as a young tactical player, and he was even called the Austrian Morphy. So his early games are an interesting source of tactics as well. Let's see, he started off with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, so typical 19th century opening, the Scotch Gambit. So I like the Scotch Gambit. I play this myself sometimes. I think it's kind of interesting. So black went with bishop c5, white castled, knight f6, and now e5. So you can continue in Scotch Gambit lines with c3, but the e5 is a respectable move here, and this actually is now the Max Lang attack. The Max Lang attack more commonly comes from the two knights defense, but this is a main way of getting into the Max Lang attack, and it can come from other openings as well. But this particular position that's on the board right now, this is the Max Lang attack. So after d5, this knight is under fire, and after e5, the knight is under fire. But the main response is d5. So we get one of these standard lines. This was probably well known to both players even at the time. So white takes the knight, black takes the bishop, rook e1 check, bishop to e6, blocking the file, and knight to g5, attacking the bishop, queen to d5, defending, so that there's no breakthrough on e6. Then knight to c3, another one of these tactical moves, but it's exploiting a pin here because the bishop is pinned. So there's two pins being exploited. The bishop is pinned, so the queen is loose, and so this pawn can't take the knight. And dual pins there. So again, this is still a known position. The queen goes to f5, and then Steinitz plays the rare move g4. So that's not played anymore. Nowadays, the move knight to e4, knight c to e4, just getting out of trouble, defending the knight over here, is the main continuation. Maybe trading off the bishop is an idea. Anyway, this position is about even, so certainly playable for both sides. If you like that kind of thing. It's you've got to be enjoying these tactical positions. Anyway, Steinitz plays g4 here, so there's a bit of a rare continuation because if black plays correctly, he can get a slight edge here. Well, first of all, he can't take the pawn because once again, this is pinned, so that pawn is defended and the queen can't take it. So the queen should move. The question is where to? And actually the move, it doesn't have too many squares also. So it's you've got a small number of squares to choose from. It turns out that putting the queen on g6 leads to a slight advantage to black, so that's why white doesn't usually play this way. But in this game, the natural queen takes f6 was played. And the reason there's a problem is because of the follow-up with knight d5 here. hitting the queen, taking advantage of the pin once again, and the queen has to run back. Okay, but now this knight is under fire. Things are getting a little bit hot here, and there's only one move that actually gives that advantage to white. Any other move and black is just fine. So if you want to guess the move here. So I guess you figured this one out, but if you haven't, pause the video. So yes, the answer here is, once again, in keeping with the theme of this video, rook takes bishop. Yeah, give up the exchange there. And like I said, this is the only move of this position that keeps an advantage. Black took back with the pawn, that's reasonable. And then knight takes. So we got a couple of pawns as well as a bishop for the rook. That's often enough material compensation, actually. Although he had given up some pawns earlier, so I think there's still a material edge for black in this position. But his king position is a mess, and there's threats all over, so this is not good for black. Let's see, queen d7 was played, and Steinitz went with queen e2, setting up a nice discovered attack against the king. Actually, with the help of a chess engine, it turns out that knight d to c7 is the strongest move here. Just cash in and maybe get the exchange back. But anyway, queen e2 is still keeping an advantage for white. Bishop to e7 was played, and that's not the best response. So just to show the best response here, the king needs to run out to f7. Not a very natural looking move, but this is how you can kind of hold on. Let's see, the knight can come to g5, check. King could run back to g8, and the knight can take on c7. This is kind of a nice idea. If the queen takes here, then this queen can come in with check, and then, oh, it's not mate. I'm sorry, it's not mate. But the queen coming in with check is quite dangerous, so not good. Let's see, d3 is actually the best move here. And now the queen stays on the e-file to maintain that threat of coming in here with check. And then let's see what goes on. Knight d4. Wrong move. Sorry. Knight d4. Okay, so now the knight is guarding this square. This knight is really in danger. So c3, kicking this knight. h6, kicking this knight. This is best play according to the chess engine. C takes d4, h takes g5, and knight takes a8, winning back the rook, and queen takes d4, leading to an exchange of queens, and then knight to c7. So this is not entirely clear-cut. White escaped from all of this piece up, but black has pressure here and has an extra pawn and may get some more. So it's a game. It's still playable. Anyway, that was the chess engine's view of this situation. So anyway, black played bishop to e7 in this game, and now knight d takes c7 was played. King runs to f7, and queen takes c4, setting up another discovered attack on the king. It seems like Steinitz liked this idea. Second time he's used that idea in this game. So knight to e5, attacking the queen. Queen just drops back but maintains the pin. Queen to d6. And now f4, kicking the knight away. The knight takes on g4, so sacrificing a pawn there. Knight to g5, check, double check actually. King comes forward to g6. I guess he didn't like the idea of being mated on f8 there. And queen to d3 check. King runs to h5. Now queen to h3 check. Queen sweeps over to the other side of the board. King goes back to g6. Queen takes g4, setting up another discovered attack on the king and also mopping up some material. Queen to b6 was played, setting up for a counter check here. Also maybe some pressure here and attacking the knight. So knight G to E6 was played, defending the knight, and discovered attack on the king. King goes to F6, and now it's getting down to the last bits here. Queen G5 check, king runs here, and queen takes G7 mate. And notice the other knight is guarding this escape square. So and this knight, of course, is defending the queen. So it's all covered. King has nowhere to run. Now notice in this game, the other rooks never got into it. These two rooks are still in the corner, and this rook, which was not sacrificed, is still at his home base. So anyway, it just shows that the minor pieces, when they're in the neighborhood of your opponent's king, can be a very dangerous force. So what can we say about this this sacrifice? Let's go back to the moment of the rook takes e6 and see what was going on in that position. So we have a position where black is not castled yet, and this exchange sacrifice here eliminates the defense in front of the king, and this piece, the rook itself, once you give it up, you see that these knights come to life. And there's also these other pieces, the bishop and the rook, are lurking if you need them, if the attack runs out of steam. But that's the main idea here, is actually getting rid of the minor pieces that are defending your opponent's king, getting rid of the pawns in front of the king, at a time when his other pieces are still on their home squares, not yet ready to jump into the game. So it's a position where time is really of the essence, and that exchange sacrifice is accelerating the attack. Okay, that's it for this video, and in the next one we're going to take a look at some more positional exchange sacrifices and see some of those ideas. See you then. Bye.